My mom wasn't able to see me nor be emotionally available to me. What I was aware of as a child was this deep inner loneliness. There was no protection for me. I feel like I lived in fight or flight for decades. I just was so lonely. I would look at my friends and their moms and be like, I don't think what my mom is, I don't think she's normal. And even today, my goodness, I mean, this feels so like lifelong. It's like I have made leaps and bounds progress. And yet I will still feel that.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast, Life as We See It podcast. On today's episode, I have a special guest. Her name is Marianne Richmond. Welcome, Marianne.
Thank you for having me. Oh,
Yeah,
thanks for the applause.
yes, I had to
Yes.
do that.
Yeah.
So a quick intro on Marianne. Marianne Richmond is a best-selling children's author. Her newest book is a memoir, which is titled If You Were My Daughter, which chronicles the tale of growing up with a narcissistic mother and how she was able to break the cycle of trauma and reclaim her voice. So she's going to be sharing her story with us. So welcome once again, Marianne.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So let's delve right into it. So, Marianne, can you
Let's
please
do
tell
it.
us about yourself? What was growing up like? Everything
Yeah.
about you. We want to know.
Okay. Oh gosh. Okay. Well, today I'm coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. I did not grow up here. For your listeners, well, let me back up a second. I am a longtime children's author and illustrator. So for the last, oh my goodness, coming up on 3 decades, I have been writing and creating books for a young audience, putting into the world messages of love and belonging and encouragement and the celebration of individuality. And I released, as you spoke of, finally my own story that offers the why behind this huge body of work that I've created over all these years. And my story is that of growing up with misdiagnosed epilepsy. So some really serious health challenges combined with a emotionally unavailable and yes, narcissistic mother, and navigating what was such a frightening, confusing journey, and finding both physical healing, but almost more difficult, honestly, was the path of emotional healing. So that is what my memoir takes the reader through that my path to healing. I grew up in it was a little town called Greendale, Wisconsin, and it was as picture perfect as it sounds. And I'm laughing because, well, first of all, the town, it's a south suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So it's about 25 minutes south of Milwaukee. And it was one of 3 government planned communities following the Great Depression. So back, as part of the New Deal, the president wanted to create these towns that showed what America could look like. And let's get people back to work where we can go grow grass and kids and thrive. And they all had the word green in them. So there were 3 of these communities, Greendale, and then there was a Greenville in Ohio and a Green something else in, I think it was Virginia. So Greendale was alphabetized, which was interesting. We all, you lived in a section, the L section or the M section or the N section. And that is how people greeted one another if you just ran into each other at the grocery store. So they'd be like, hey, how are you? And then if you didn't know each other, the second question was undoubtedly, what section do you live in? And as I reflect on that, I find so much humor in it because this simple alphabetical way of designing the town created a very strong socioeconomic dividers. Because if you could say, oh, I'm from the F, G, or H, well, you had a lot of money. But if you were A, B, or C, it was like, okay, you live in the smaller houses. And then there was a whole bunch of middle of the road L and O. I don't think there was a P section, actually. So anyway, that was the town I grew up in. And it was when I was 9 years old. I feel like that is where my memoir starts, is at age 9. And for me, that is when I feel like the journey really began, because that is the year I had my first full body seizure, and it came out of the blue. I was in 4th grade, and the premise of the book is how the stories that we are born into shape the ones we tell about ourselves. And so if you think about it, we are all this story in progress. That was started long before us, and then we get dropped into a plot in progress. And the story that I was dropped into was one of a traumatized mother. So prior to me being born, she was in the Air Force as a young woman, and she was depressed. She went through a bout of depression, and she subsequently was put through electroshock therapy in the Air Force. So this was in the 50s, and back then it was very barbaric. They would strap you to a table, induce electricity through your brain, essentially put seizures into your body with the idea of ousting the mental illness, if you will. So my mom comes out of that completely traumatized. And, just to camp on that word trauma for a minute, one of the biggest takeaways in writing this book was really deeply understanding what trauma is. And part of that came from, I actually went back to grad school 2 years ago and got my master's in clinical mental health counseling, because I really wanted to understand how our brains and bodies hold on to our stories from a cellular place. And one of the teachers that I came across defined trauma as overwhelming helplessness. And that really, really resonated with me, because when we talk about people experiencing trauma or being traumatized, when we think that those experiences generally have an element of overwhelming helplessness or unsafety, that really illuminated that, yes, my experience was trauma. And I think it's easy to talk ourselves out of the severity of things. Oh, yeah, that was hard, but trauma? Well, I don't know about that. That sounds big. But if you take my mom's story, electroshock therapy, that was the ultimate in helplessness. And then I'm 9 years old and I start having seizures. And my mom starts parenting me out of a place of extreme fear and self-focus, honestly. So her attention wasn't on me. Her attention was on seeking justice for her own experience, if that makes sense. And so it was never about, what does my child need as a unique individual? It was more the response of, what am I going to do to avoid my own fear? If that makes sense. So to bring that into real terms, she did not believe in the medical community, because she had such a severe distrust of doctors following her own experience. She was taking me to homeopaths and chiropractors and people who were giving me all sorts of diagnoses, from pinched nerve to psychosomatic. Honestly, that it was my own mind creating these seizures. She was a highly religious woman, so she was using prayer as another remedy, and she wouldn't allow me to have medication. So I was really left alone. I was left to navigate this terrifying journey on my own, essentially. And my mom wasn't able to see me. She wasn't able to see me nor be emotionally available to me, because much of the years were her spent writing letters to the government. She became convinced that she was a victim of mind control experiments by the CIA. That became her narrative, her truth about what happened to her. And she was not willing to make room for much else, to be honest.
Wow. So were you her only child? And also the cryo, what did you call that thing she got from the military? Did that in any way impact her mental capabilities, her cognitive function, or why was she so anti everything medical? If that was the only treatment back then for what she was going through and she received that, what was it about that treatment that really impacted her negatively?
Yeah, that's such a great question because some of it I have to fill in the gaps, but from reading like journals she left behind and some other things that I was able to access of hers, she wasn't willing to see it as something else. She wasn't willing to entertain the truth. Oh, this was a barbaric way to treat me for depression. She just wouldn't accept that. And she, in 1977, there was this article that came out in the Milwaukee Journal about how the CIA admitted to all these mind control experiments on innocent people. Completely unrelated. It was completely unrelated. And when my mom saw that article in the newspaper, she pinned her experience together with that. Like glue, and started telling everybody I was one of those victims. And it's like, no, I don't think so, Mom. And she just wouldn't hear anything else. And so then her years of mothering were spent looking backwards. What happened to me? I'm so angry. How dare they? I need an apology. I want compensation. Over and over and over. And it was falling on deaf ears. Either she wasn't getting a response or they were just shutting her down. And it's like, yeah, no, I don't think so. And meanwhile, I'm this young girl screaming for help. Like, see me. I am terrified to be in my body. I am terrified to be in my life. I don't know when the next quote unquote episode is going to claim my body, because the lack of medical intervention meant that I had no real diagnosis for myself, which when you can't name what's happening to you, that is the birth of shame. I just started to think I was crazy, that
This was at 9.
At 9 years old. Yeah.
9 years old. Wow. And were you the only child, or were there?
Yeah, you had asked that. No, I actually had two brothers who were 2 and 3 years older than me. And I had a dad who was hard of hearing. So he physically couldn't hear me if I yelled for help. And then my brothers were just preoccupied in their own lives. And
they were kids too.
They were kids. They didn't really pay attention to what their sister was up to. And my mom didn't make it a family problem. It was a she and I problem. So no one else was invited in to the story. And she was really my only link to any kind of meaningful help that didn't come. Right. And so when I would try to talk to her about, talk about an inner knowing, even as a young child, and it's easy to dismiss children as, oh, they're just children, but they're so inherently wise already. And deep down, I knew these doctors didn't know what they were talking about. I knew I had something wrong with me.
So did she finally take you to a doctor, or at some point?
Well, yes, there was one doctor in the earliest years, and it was a neurologist. And he was one of the first doctors to tell me that it was psychosomatic. So it was a combination of the medical gaslighting, of the doctors not believing I was telling the truth, combined with my mom, who was wary of them to begin with. And then when I was 12, there was a boy in my class who had an epileptic seizure next to me. His mom came in the classroom, told us that he had epilepsy. If he had a seizure, this is what we were supposed to do. She gave us the whole rundown. And I remember hearing that, being really scared. And then sure enough, he had a full body seizure right in the classroom. And I was beside myself, but not, I was terrified to watch him, but I knew in a moment that's what I had. I looked at this kid and I was like, oh my God, he is me. Wow. I am him. I have what he has. And I went running home to tell my mom. I can picture it. And I said, I have epilepsy and we need to get help. And this is, this is what it is and this is what you can do for it. And she dismissed me. And she told me that it was my diet and we were going to work on that with vitamins. And she never mentioned the word epilepsy again. And I didn't bring it up with her either. And so from 12 to like 18, I just dealt with it. And if a seizure would happen, I would have it, or I would try to hide. Sometimes I would run and see if I could find a bathroom stall so that no one would see me. And it wasn't until I was a freshman in college, I did have a really bad seizure in my dorm room. And my roommate called the paramedics and I was taken to the hospital. And that doctor finally diagnosed me with epilepsy. And I can still remember, he's like, I find it hard to believe you haven't been treated for this. I'm like, yeah, me too. And by then I was 18 and I could take the medication to curb my seizures, and told my mom, and she still wasn't supportive back then.
Must have been really tough. I can't even imagine, like at that young age, to just be all alone in this, having seizures and having to be ashamed of it and hiding yourself so that no one knows. Wow.
Yeah, it was awful.
That is
It was
awful.
awful. Yeah, and I just thought, I would look at my friends and their moms and be like, I don't think what my mom is, I don't think she's normal. Like when I look at other moms, I feel like mine is really odd.
Wow.
But again, as a kid, you don't even know. It's just you're in it. Is my family
normal? Yeah. If you're you don't really know how abnormal it is. So was that the only area where she was dismissive of you, or was he just in the area? I'm not saying just, it's not a light thing because it's really heavy, but were there other areas where maybe when it comes to your emotions or your pains or your frustrations, was she always willing to, embrace you and talk you through things? Or was she just
no.
standoffish?
Yeah, very standoffish. Yeah, very, very standoffish. One of the earliest things that I heard from her was how she never wanted to be married. And then she was very vocal about saying, I never wanted to be married, but your dad's sisters talked me into it. That was also a very strong narrative. And from there, she didn't really want to be a mother either. So I was parented by a woman who didn't want the role she was in. And so it almost felt like you were swimming again, or you were walking through cement in a way to try to, I don't know if that's the appropriate name, like just to get noticed by her because she was so deep in her own
world. Like you said, she was living in the past of things done to her.
And just the unhappiness of being in her current marriage to this man who had a disability. She was married to a man who couldn't hear. And because she was very religious, very Catholic, she also was very vocal about not being intimate until you were married. And so she found out the depth of my dad's handicap, if that makes sense, only after being married.
What?
Well, okay, so the fact that when he took his hearing aids off, he couldn't hear anything. And it was this, oh my gosh, I didn't know it was this bad. Wow. Because he didn't reveal that either.
To her, I see.
Because he was in his own pain about it, I believe, and desperately wanted to be in a relationship. So he wasn't going to do anything that
was going to muddy that. Yeah. So she was coming from a place of a lot of pain and betrayal, like the government betrayed her husband betrayed her, tricked her into marrying. Oh, wow.
Yes, that is so right. And so, like, when your narrative is that very strong victim mentality, there is no room for coming alongside anyone else. I remember when I did get married, she said to me, be glad you don't have a marriage like mine. Yeah, that was super painful.
Did she ever love your father? Did she ever love him, or?
Did she love him? That is such a good question. I I think it was more of a companionship love.
Okay.
But certainly not a lustful, sexy love where I'm so excited about this guy. Yeah, no. I think they became dependent on each other in different ways.
Right.
My dad was the breadwinner and didn't make a lot of money, but he was working. She was his ears. And so they both got something from each other.
From each other.
But they were not affectionate with each other.
And we're
It
not
was
affectionate to the kids as well. Was your dad
No.
more affectionate at least? No.
Yeah, my dad was a real sentimental guy. I'm much more like him than my mom. He loved to write. He loved to make things in his wood shop in the basement. Yeah, he was very sentimental, very melancholy, and she was not. So I felt like I had more in common with my dad. And in a way could relate. We were both held hostage in certain ways, his hearing, my seizures. Both of our bodies were betraying us. But we never talked about that. These were all my observations as a kid. But it's not like we had heartfelt conversations about anything.
Conversations. Wow.
Yeah. I was deeply lonely as a child. Deeply lonely. Yeah.
That must have been tough.
It was like 5 people just fending for themselves, really. There wasn't that family unit that y'all owed something to or wanted to be a part of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry. I wanted to just dig a deeper still into your childhood. So for your mom, it's amazing that you have such empathy for her. Like you're able to understand her background to say, okay, this was why she wasn't affectionate to me. But in the moment as a child, as a 9-year-old, 12-year-old, did you know what you were experiencing was abuse, or was it just, did you, like, how abnormal was that to you that you had epilepsy, you had seizures, and your mom just refused to take you to get the help you needed? How did that impact you, affect? Did you think it was abuse? Did you think it was just, oh yeah, she's a woman of faith? Because I'm also a Christian, I'm a woman of faith, and I believe, God heals, God heals us, right? But when it comes to, if it was happening to her, she had the faith to believe God could heal her. That is personal to her. But happening to a child, you're still a child. You probably don't have as much faith as she. She can't impose her faith on you, right? So the ideal thing to do was to take you to the hospital. So was that abuse? Did you know what was happening at that time?
No, I didn't see. I wouldn't have used the word. Well, the word I did use was I feel abandoned. I wouldn't have used the word I feel like this is abuse. There is one of the women who reviewed my memoir, her name's Kelly McDaniel, and she wrote a book called Mother Hunger, which is how adult daughters can heal from lost nurturance, guidance, and protection. And she said to me after her review, she said, Marianne, we heal by being witnessed. And I loved that sentiment so much. It really, really helped me see clearly how the absence of a witness, well, it's like trauma, there's the trauma. And if we can have the witnessing along the way, we can cultivate resilience from that trauma. But if we have the trauma and never have that advocate or witness, that is what leads to the depression and anxiety and PTSD. So what I was aware of as a child was this deep inner loneliness, which Kelly would call mother hunger, that deep desire for the nurturing, the guidance, and the protection. There was no protection for me. It was, I'm not going to allow you medication that would allow you to exist safely in your body. So I feel like I lived in fight or flight for decades of when is the next thing going to happen? It was just this hypervigilance that I existed with. But again, didn't think, this is abusive. I didn't think that. I just was so lonely.
Must have been tough, especially
Yeah.
having like brothers and everyone is just disconnected, living their own way. Because I feel like the mom sets the tone for the home, you
You,
know?
yeah, I want to underline that and put an
Yeah.
exclamation point after that. That is so true. And when you think of the families where there is a warmth and an expectation, you got to,
Mhm.
oh, mom's having dinner tonight, you better show up. And then everyone laughs. But the undercurrent of that is connection.
Yes.
It's important.
Hmm.
It's important to show up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when your house is led by a woman who doesn't want the role of homemaker, mother, wife, the dynamic that's cultivated is every person for themselves.
Themselves. Yeah. That's horrible. And how did
Yeah.
outsiders view her? Like, how did her friends or family, did they see her as a perfect woman? Because that's what I hear about narcissists most times. They're like gold into outsiders, but to their families, they're just not there.
Well, interestingly enough, she didn't have a lot of friends, and her family was back in Philadelphia. And she was in Wisconsin. So she really didn't see her family very much. And then she had maybe one or two friends that she would have coffee with. So that was the other odd thing. My parents they never socialized. They never had people over. We didn't have extended family in the area, which just was another layer of this lonely feeling. I was like, where is everybody? Like, why? Like,
Where are the
why do you?
cousins
Yeah, well, and we had that on my dad's side. They were an hour away, but my mom refused to go.
to go?
So again, she kept us in her lonely world.
Hmm.
I think people thought she was a little crazy. And I don't want to say, I mean, crazy. We throw that word around a lot.
Hmm.
She was always writing letters to the editor of our little community paper. If she saw some perceived injustice about anything, she's going to write a letter about it. She was really into her health food, all her vitamins. And so she created like these pamphlets introducing people to all the vitamins and their benefits. And she used to hand them out around town. Okay, this is like 19,
She was passionate about something.
which is why I could not understand her
Yeah.
indifference toward me.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's like you clearly have passions for things.
Yeah.
You're writing these books and giving them to all the grocery store clerks
Hmm.
and I would love that attention.
Did she ever consider therapy, counseling, or it
Oh
wasn't a
gosh,
thing back
no.
in the 70s? It wasn't, I'm
No.
sure.
No, no, that word wasn't even ever mentioned.
Okay.
No, no. And you're right. I mean, we didn't even know anyone divorced. In alphabetized Greendale, no one got divorced either.
Yeah.
Uh yeah, I think she was looked at as like with a shake of the head from people. Like, oh yeah, Mary, that was her name. And then ha 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 and yeah. I felt embarrassed about her. Yeah. I mean, some have said, oh, she was a woman ahead of her time. Maybe, she was doing yoga before yoga was cool. So, back then. Um, and this, call it emotional abandonment, really followed me through life.
Yeah, that was going to be my
Yeah.
next question. How did that growing up with that much neglect, how did it impact your personal life, relationships, friendships, everything?
Well, you talk about narcissism and the traits of narcissism. A big one is lack of empathy. Inability to see someone else's situation, feel feelings. So yeah, she was unable to do that. Very self-centered in her own narrative, and the result of that is, well, it's really an attachment wound at its core. So if you think about a little child who is making their way in the world and they have a need and they state a need, secure attachment would have that caregiver say, oh, yes, I hear you. Let's get that taken care of. And then the child learns, I can have a need. My needs are important, and I can trust this grown up to come alongside me. Well, that mechanism for me was broken. And so what I learned is that I couldn't trust myself because when I thought I knew, I was talked out of that. And I certainly couldn't. So I couldn't trust myself and I couldn't trust her. So you take that into friendship, romance, the workplace. You are never sure of yourself. So, for me, it manifested as slow to trust people in general, almost waiting for them to abandon me in some way, unable to trust myself, which means I have a heck of a time trying to make a decision because I didn't understand the internal GPS, if you will, that exists in us, like how to even read mine. So I would say lack of self-trust, low self-esteem, low self-worth. Those were all the hallmarks of being me. That whole worth piece is really wrapped up in the self-trust piece too, of learning that we are worth someone's presence. We are worth someone's attention. And when that doesn't come from your mom or your dad in the way that your heart needs, and I want to underscore that, because if you take my brothers, they might say, yeah, I got everything I needed. But they didn't need in the same way I did.
You did, yes, true.
And partly, yes, I had health issues, but partly I'm a sensitive soul. So I feel deeply. So the narrative, my counter narrative was, I am not worth love and I am not worth love. When my mom, ultimately I had brain surgery. I had a brain tumor and
Sorry to hear that.
thank you. And which was the cause of all those seizures all along. And my mom did come for the brain surgery, but after some coercing, I would say. And I remember she was going to come and stay 2 weeks. So 1 week in the hospital, 1 week at home. And we made it through the week in the hospital. And my first day home, she told me she wanted to leave. And I was just flabbergasted. And I thought, I just got home from brain surgery. I said, why are you leaving? And she said, I was dating my husband at the time. His name is Jim. And she said, well, you and Jim have it covered. And so I think in her mind, everything was very transactional. There was this concept of just being with, being present for, was not available to her. Everything was check the box. Okay, I did it. I stayed. I'm leaving now. Which just reinforced that, well, I must not be worth it. What else would one conclude to that with the tools I had available? Yes. I mean, now, of course, after a lot of my own therapy and work, I have different conclusions about that. But back then, that it had to be me. It had to be you. Yeah,
that's true. Wow. That's really tough. That's tough. Wow.
Yeah.
So it looks like it was just, and I wonder, wow. Okay, let me ask, how did this also impact your relationship with your husband? Like, did it play a role in your romantic relationship? Because I hear a lot of kids who maybe grew up with narcissistic parents, I hear most times they find partners that remind them of their parents, their narcissistic parents. So did you ever fall into that type of trap, maybe while dating or?
Well, I'll tell you how it manifested. Okay, so I spoke about this lack of self-trust. So my pattern was giving away decision-making power, ability, whatever you want to call that, giving away decision-making to my husband because he was so much quicker to come to an answer. He had so much more internal certainty about things that I would just deflect to him and say, well, fine, we'll just do it your way. Even if I didn't necessarily agree, it felt easier and quicker than me wrestling with my own internal processes of trying to figure out clarity. Well, what happens is then if it doesn't work out, then I'm just going to blame
him.
Yeah, which is my own victim story. And then when I realized, oh my gosh, I'm doing some of the same things she did, that's a moment too. It's like, I'm playing a victim role just in a different story.
Yeah.
I had a therapist say, when you can't trust yourself, Everybody else better be right. And if they're not, huge betrayal and huge resentment.
Mm.
Yeah. And I thought, yeah, check. Yeah.
Everybody else better be right, otherwise
Yeah.
I'm
Because
gonna be in trouble.
yes, because I gave you I gave my power to you to make the decisions. So you better do
Sure.
right by me.
Wow. So what are
Yeah.
you mentioned trust is one of them. What are the other long-term effects of such narcissistic abuse? How does it show up and how can one reclaim their power,
Mm-hmm.
reclaim their voice after those?
Yeah. I think the biggest ones are recognizing your own inherent worth, your own inherent value.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the most helpful healing, one of the ways that I was able to really work through the healing of this was that ability to separate, what do I want to say? The separate my identity from my circumstances. So I had squished those two together in, my mom is unable to be a witness in my life. So I must not be worth loving. I made that about my identity. And a big part of my healing was reclaiming what is true about myself. I am a valuable human being. I am inherently good. And I have a narcissistic mother. And I can view her with that emotional distance. Not that it doesn't hurt, and not that there's not grief about that, because there is. There is so much, well, why did that have to be my mom? Like my daughter's self felt really ripped off. But when we're able to separate our identity from our situation, it does allow us to be a little more objective and to be a little more self-protective of saying, okay, knowing this, what actions, lack of action, boundaries, self-care strategies
Mm-hmm.
do I need to deal with my situation?
Mm-hmm.
In narrative therapy, who's the guy? I think Michael White, is it? Was like one of the founders of narrative therapy, where he says, the person isn't the problem is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that because I think it reminds us that it's not our fault, but we can have agency in how we choose to deal with it.
To deal with it, right.
The other thing that was incredibly helpful on my healing journey was getting to know my inner voice. Like, what is it? What does that even sound like? People talk about, listen to the voice of your heart. And I would hear that and it's like, what are you talking about? Because fear was the loudest voice in my life. I was forever waiting for the shoe to drop and what's going to happen and when's it going to happen and how's the rug going to be pulled out from under me. I was always looking for that and just waiting. And this, again, through therapy, we talked a lot about our three centers of knowing. Your head, of course, the cognitive thoughts you have, but then also your heart and that your entire emotional landscape. And then, of course, the somatic information about how our bodies feel in a situation, and taking all that information and becoming intimately familiar with, well, what does yes feel like in my body? What does no feel like? What if my stomach's clenching, but my brain says yes? And those seem to be at odds. Who do I listen to? And really, really getting deeply familiar with my own internal vocabulary.
That is really good. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes our brain tells us something different than what our gut is telling us. So just being
All the
able to
time.
all the time. Yeah.
All the time. And our gut is usually the more trustworthy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
9 times out of 10. I'm gonna
Yeah.
say nine
Yeah.
and a half. The body
And
knows. The
the
body
body
knows.
knows. The body knows what is right or what is good or who is good and who is not. Someone can
Yeah,
appear all nice and wonderful, but something in your spirit, like there's just this check. You're like, oh, there's something there. And
I know.
sometimes if you don't listen to that gut feeling, you
Right. But think of how complicated that is for someone who has had an emotionally unavailable mother. If we already are struggling with, am I allowed to have needs? Am I allowed to
yeah.
want what I want? And making a decision may disappoint people,
Hmm.
even if our gut is like, no, 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 no. But our brain is saying, oh, but they may not invite me back or they may not like me. That feels really dangerous. Like, oh,
It
I
feels
don't know.
dangerous, yeah. I feel
Yeah,
like people pleasing is just like what you're saying. I'm sure, I guess you grew up being some sort of variation of a people pleaser. Is that correct or no?
for sure. I wanted to
Okay.
be easy to get along with.
Get along with,
I
sit at the
wanted,
table, just be kind, be nice,
yeah, I'm not going to stand up for myself.
mhm,
And even today, my goodness, I mean, this feels so like lifelong. It's like I have made leaps and bounds progress. And yet I will still feel that twinge if
mm,
my choice goes against the
your gut
masses
feeling.
somehow.
Yeah.
And I get that like look of disappointment from someone or, oh, I don't agree. For a moment, it'll be like, oh, okay, never mind, never mind. I'll change. And I have to sit with that. Like, where's that coming from? Oh, that's old. That's old stuff.
Mhm.
And,
It's a lifelong
it
kind
is.
of.
I hate that.
The wheel keeps turning. You just keep working on it, working on it.
I know.
Wow.
But it gets more familiar where
Mhm.
if it doesn't go away, you can at least go, oh, there it is. Well, I know what's going on. I know.
Yeah,
I'm okay. I'm wrestling with XYZ, or I've felt this conflict before. Yeah, this feels like this.
that's
So it's
true.
not as foreign.
Boring as that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Wow. I can't believe we've spent how many, okay, so we're maybe coming up to the hour now, but
Oh
I
my
wanted
gosh,
to
that
know.
was quick.
I, I know it went by so fast. I still want to know, right? What are the signs of narcissistic behavior you can identify
Mm.
in a person? And what also causes narcissism? Is it maybe like your mom's story where she encountered some things as a kid that kind of made her that way? Or are people born with narcissism?
Oh gosh, I don't know if I'm completely qualified to answer that question.
Okay.
According to my mom, or look, when I think of my mom, I think she had several issues going on. I think she was struggling with depression her whole life, for sure. I think she had narcissistic tendencies also in there. I think she had PTSD. I think she was struggling with several things.
Things.
So I don't know if I'm qualified to rattle off like the diagnostic criteria of narcissism or narcissistic disorder, other than saying some of the classic signs being lack of empathy, completely self occupied. I mean, those are the two that stand out top to me. And your question of why, gosh, that feels like going back to my earliest classwork in grad school about epigenetics and nature versus nurture and generational trauma. I think about being in my mom. I think about the egg. This is going to sound crazy, but I think about the egg that became me
Hmm.
residing in my mom's body when she was undergoing electroshock therapy. I think about little babies growing inside women who are suffering domestic violence.
Hmm.
And I think how much of that trauma is being absorbed. I'm not a neuroscientist, so I can't speak
Yeah.
to all that, but
Hmm.
I think it's so complicated.
That's true.
And when as part of my internship, I worked as a group therapist in addiction recovery. And to a person, all their stories of addiction were so unique And yet the funnel brought them all back to their earliest caregiving, their relationship with a father, an unavailable father, or an abusive mother, or where they learned that life was too hard. They didn't have the witness. And let's turn to other substances to deal. And I look at my mom's upbringing. She was born into immigrant family. Her parents came over through Ellis Island from Lithuania. They didn't speak English. She was lonely.
Sure.
So it feels like you're given a bunch of stuff from the get-go.
True. That's true.
And then how are you going to reshape your own trajectory?
That's true. Yeah. I mean, when you look at it holistically like that way, you definitely just feel empathy and kind of understanding, right? For that parents, wouldn't give you the love and nurture you needed.
I'd also like to see more honest conversations happening between parents and their kids. And are you, me saying to my children, are you getting what you need from me?
I bet you parent your children differently than your mom parent. Like you give them too much love, right? Do you give them so much love that they're like, Mom, it's a lot?
Yeah. Well, and to a degree, I take on way more than I should. There's definitely, another sign, codependency. You asked for another sign, right? Yeah, codependency. I am responsible for everybody's happiness. That doesn't work. Because with my mom, she ended up getting Alzheimer's. She forgot everything. She forgot who I was. So our story never got wrapped up in any sort of resolution or accountability or apology, like nothing. And I think that's so important to check in with the people in our life and say, am I giving you what you need from me? I don't know if I can, but I'd sure like to know how what I am doing is landing for you.
That's good. That's a good check-in. Always getting that feedback. That's really good.
Well, think about how often our intentions are misunderstood.
True.
And same with my mom. I'm sure her every intention was to protect me, and I took away abandonment.
Wow. That's serious what you're saying now. So as parents should always check in with their children, say, hey, are you getting the love I feel I'm giving to you? Are you receiving it the way I intended for it to be, or do you feel something else? That's actually.
Is this landing how I hope it is?
Wow. This has been a wonderful conversation. I'm so, wow. So what finally, and just in a quick summary, what advice do you give to someone who has probably grown up, who has a similar story as yours, who is still trying to grapple with it or like come out of it? What advice, what tips do you give to them? And then what are you working on now? What projects are you working on now? And how can people find you and your work, your book?
Yes, thank you for asking. Okay, so for your first question of what can people do, I mean, one of the things that comes to mind is that story behind the story. Maybe take the time to delve into the backstory of the people who raised you, not to a place where you have to say it's okay. It may, you may never want to forgive them. That is such an individual choice. But I have found that extending that willingness to look at the story into which you were born can widen your perspective, and it can allow some room to exchange some of the condemnation for compassion. Now, I chose to forgive my mom. She probably does. Well, she probably knows they're sitting up in heaven. But I was tired of telling the story the same way, of kind of that victim narrative. I was tired of telling it that way. So I found forgiveness allowed me to unhook from a certain version of the story. Speaking of church, I was sitting in church and a reverend said to me, forgiveness costs you your story. And that is in the front of my book jacket, because I do think when we choose acceptance or forgiveness, we can't tell our story the same way as we could before.
True.
So that's one thing, but then the inner work of really, really getting to know your own centers of knowing. How does my body communicate yes? How does it communicate no? What do those feelings feel like, so that I can recognize them and use them to steer me on my path and reclaim my voice and reclaim my agency over life. So those are kind of my two tidbits. I do still see some clients individually, and it feels like everyone to a person is trying to find their way back to themselves in one way or another, and it looks cloudy. As far as checking out my work, my website is like the catch-all for that, which is my name.com. It's mariannerichmond.com, and it's one word, MarianneRichmond.com. So you can see all my kids' books on my website, my memoir. My books are available everywhere: Barnes & Noble, Target, Amazon, independent bookshops, kind of that, everywhere books are sold.
Everywhere. Wow.
You'll
awesome.
find them. Yeah.
Wow. That is awesome.
Thank
you.
you.
I'm going to put all your information in the show notes of the podcast
Great.
and also in the YouTube video description here, so people can connect. Wow. That's interesting.
Thank you so much.
Do you
I
have
really
any
appreciate
final
that.
words? Yeah, sure. Any final words for our listeners or viewers?
I guess just an encouragement to people to perhaps be a witness for somebody else, to ask for what you need, and to know that you get to do it your own way. This journey has been so long for me. And at times I felt frustrated that I was still carrying it around and still dealing with it and still feeling hurt and still feeling this, that, and the other thing. And sometimes it just takes as long as it takes. So no judgment there.
Yeah, it's okay. Just take whatever time you need to get to where you need to be. No judgment, like you said.
I hope my book is a witness to someone else whose journey path has been hard. I hope that they can read certain things in my story and feel seen.
Yeah.
And feel less alone.
Wow. Thank you so much, Marianne.
Yes,
It's
you're
been a
welcome.
wonderful hour talking to you. I feel like the time went by so fast, and I wish we could keep going on and on.
And my headphones keep falling out. So
yeah, thank you so much. I think your story tells of resilience, strength, power. I can't even I can't imagine it. But as a child, I know where I was at 9 years old, 12-year old. Like, if I didn't have the kind of emotional connection with my parents as I had, because those were some of the toughest years, right? As a child, you just come into your own, coming into teenagehood and puberty, and you just need your parents, much less when you're going through, tough health challenge, and not getting the affection from them. It must have been tough. But here you are today, sharing your story and blessing the world with your story. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for giving me an audience to do so.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. So thank you so much, viewers, for watching. We really appreciate your support. Thank you for listening. Please leave us a review, like, comment, subscribe, share, and please check out Marianne's work. Go to our website. I'm going to leave all the description in the show notes and in the YouTube video as well. Please buy her book. It's going to transform your life. Thank you so much for your support. And until I see you next time, take care. Bye-bye. Thanks, Marianne.